from something like Voyager or Aleph to Alma, there's not a concept of an online catalog in the next generation system. It's only the discovery system. So it's got to carry kind of the full weight of being able to find known items and high quality content for all kinds of users.
And the discovery systems that we see that are being developed have these great advanced search capabilities where you can still, in instruction, teach your patrons how to best get
Yep.
what the relevancy for their research is.
Yeah. So, but it's gotten better, it's got to get better.
Right.
And you're going to say something.
Well, there's still some disadvantages to when the patron profile is there. As an example, you buy a stock pot on Amazon, okay? And then after that, you keep getting emails. How many stock pots do you get? You know?
But that's,
Right.
but we don't do that. I mean, we want to use what, kind of the model of e-commerce, but applying library values. The technology exists and Amazon uses it to sell stuff. We need to be able to take the same kind of technology and have kind of a more objective and customer, and library values driven approach. So we're doing this doesn't mean that you have to send out reminders to patrons saying, here, don't you want this book? Don't you want this book? You got to have the right level of that and under your control.
And I think when you're talking about adding library values into it, that is the key, because if you're a patron that uses Google all the time, your view of what is standard and what is general and what is accepted is so funneled by what you've searched before, that as a public library, when someone searches for gun control, just because they have checked out things before that are pro or anti, we don't want to show them only one set. We want to show the whole thing, so that, and that, I think, is part of the argument. We want to
And all of that you can build it.
full.
It's taking, you have all these little knobs to kind of tune results the way that you want. How do you want to turn the knobs? But you don't want to just kind of take all the knobs away and everybody gets the same thing no matter what, or go back to kind of the realm of keyword matching and hoping for the best, and never getting the
That's
best.
back to the customization, being able to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So regarding library values, just three quick things. Number one, there have always been exceptions. The software for talking books, the software for outreach services has always been keyed on maintaining a reader history to do selection. Second of all, libraries automation does have an advantage because of the fact that transactions are bound into the services provided, and whether it's placing a hold, doing a remote checkout or whatever, at some point there's usually going to be identification involved anyhow, so why not use it? And the final thing is, patrons are now posting their own reading histories with increasing frequency, whether it's
That's right.
bibliocommons or
That's kind of what
library.
Bibliocommons is made out of,
Yes.
are those lists that you expose.
Yeah, I mean, their fantasy now, they've got their little happy video that they've put together. It's based on a person tracking their whole life through what they read when they were in school, when they were get married, when they were
Yeah.
pregnant, et cetera, et
But
cetera.
from a
So-
library point of view, we want that to be opt-in. We would never want it to be
Yes.
imposed.
Right, we want it to be out there.
Yes.
Yeah, we were saying, it's rarely in those lists that they're posting, though, do you see a guide to bankruptcy?
Right. How to do a happy divorce.
We all have our public self and our private stuff, and the tab they can open up in Chrome, that's always anonymous kind of thing. We want to have that kind of capability. Shall we move on a bit and talk about resource sharing? So, it's a critical question. How if any library wants to offer more to its patrons than what it can afford to buy? Does someone have an unlimited budget and has bought everything? So probably not. We're going to, the Harvards of the world, they're getting much more into the mode of resource sharing than in the mode of let's buy everything. So this is the standard approach to integrated library systems that's been around for a long time. It is, in a multi-branch kind of environment. We know how to do that. It's baked into the infrastructure. You can have multiple branches that share a bibliographic database. Any of these can request items from each other, from the main facility. There's workflows kind of built into it that, this is well-established functionality. And it's pretty efficient if your universe of search is one library, powered by one integrated library system. So you can also say, well, I want to be able to get things that my library doesn't have. So this is probably the classic interlibrary loan model, where someone can probably mediate, maybe not, make a request that's been fulfilled through a global fulfillment service, probably OCLC. So this is kind of a $20 per request kind of model. So it doesn't come free, it's very expensive, it's got, you've got to, make sure that the loan is synchronized with the borrowing and lending library. Iliad is the classic software that does that. So there's a place in the world for this, but it's not what you want to do for every single transaction that a patron in your library will want to do for something that you don't have in your library. So what's the in-between ground? So resource sharing systems have been around for a while as well. So the big one on the block for a long time was the URSA system, developed in Australia, eventually bought by Dynex, then become part of Circe Dynex, and a few years ago was just abandoned. So things like InReach and Relay and ShareIt, Monographics, more or less follow this model, so that you have all of these independent integrated library systems. They be different brands from different providers, big, little, and so that when a patron from this library wants something, they can make a request. Well, first they have to go into the shared database. So they have their online catalog, they didn't find it. Somehow they've got to know to go to the union database. How they know that, I don't know, but it's a different system. They have to know to go search that, because it's probably not going to be their primary search environment. It might be. So OhioLink, that's kind of the way it works. They always search the central catalog. So you search that, and then it says, okay, I want to be able to let this patron borrow the book from this item. So about 20 different INSIP requests transpire in order to be able to push a transaction to this system that's borrowing it, that makes a temporary patron record, that takes the item record, puts a hold on it, initiates the pickup request and the delivery request, that then shows up over here, and then so there's this very complex set of transactions that goes on for every resource fulfillment request. But in the end, it provides the ability to do direct consortial borrowing. So that's what a lot of consortia want to do. How do we provide a bigger universe, spanning different integrated library systems, in order to be able to satisfy patron needs? And this approach has been around a while. It's very complicated, it's very fragile, and it's kind of expensive. Right? It depends on each of these systems having an INSIP responder and what it responds to or not. And that's kind of the weakness of a lot of these, is that different ILSs have different levels of compliance to INSIP and different business models for getting that. Are you having to pay 10 grand a year to get access to the INSIP calls? So there are different issues involved in implementing this model, but it's been done successfully. One of the original ones in the academic realm in the US was OhioLink. They kind of commissioned Innovating to build InReach, because they had all Millennium systems, or Interpack systems at the time. How do we connect them all together to share our resources together? So, this came out of the 1980s, and using different flavors of INSIP to do that. And then so you have to have the staff management tools in the middle, so what's patron mediated, what needs staff intervention. So there's a bit of overhead technically and personnel. So the other approach would be is that why do we have to have all these separate integrated library systems? The ability to do this is kind of baked into the standard integrated library system. You have to move to next generation systems. Instead of having all the previous, you have each library with its branches that all share a database. So the advantage of this approach is that from the get-go, the searching they have an easy ability to switch between what's in my library and what's in the consortium. And, you know, it's just kind of built in. Here's the built-in kind of circulation and hold and delivery features in one system instead of having all the overhead and trying to make it work among 3, a dozen, 100. And I would say the scalability of the previous model is quite limited. How many of these in-SIP conversations can really successfully happen in a given time? You know, and how do you populate the central database? You know, you populate it once, how do you keep it in sync? How do you do real-time holding? If someone searches a central database, how do they know that that item is on the shelf? You know, and you have to have all the real-time holding things enabled to be able to do that, and most of these resource sharing systems don't. So it's all, there's a billion details involved in trying to do direct consortial wireless. So my observation is that a lot of library organizations are trying to move to this, that a consortia would say, instead of having to deal with all these different integrated library systems, can there just be one for our consortium? So kind of the Illinois Heartline model, but there are examples in other places as well.
Marshall,
Yes,
can you speak to the capacity of that model? In
which
terms
one?
of The one you were just talking, a single.
Did I say something earlier that with these technologies it's infinite? I don't really know what the top end of this is. The top end would be determined not by number of bib records and number of libraries, but more about how can you get them to the business and other issues. Can you get 100 libraries to agree to share their stuff?
In the same way.
It doesn't have to be the same way, because you can have this model and have every library have their own policies. I think it's kind of, doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. I mean, so I think it's another thing that libraries kind of make more, that we care a lot about. So library 3 says, well, my books of this kind check out for 2 weeks. And this one says 10 days. So you want to respect that if it's helpful. But what is the value in those kinds of differences? You know, are you willing to have a system that costs twice as much and be twice as complex to be able to share your resources? You know, so is there value in that or not? Or is it just preference? You know, we've got to kind of separate business objectives, customer issues from preferences. When I used to work at Vanderbilt, you know, we had circulation policies that were finely tuned. This item to this patron this many days, to another patron this many days. And, you know, this is a kind of a book, this is book A, it's a little bit different. So it gets against the circulation policies. And these circulation policies were so complex that I would defy any circulation librarian to take a book and predict how long it would be out to this patron. And so the patrons, of course, have no way to establish their expectations for how long they ought to have a thing, because it's just, there's too many rules. So I've always, you know, especially in that kind of environment, believed in radical simplification. You know, there are times when the differences are important, they make a difference, and a lot of times it's just because we've always done it that way. And if that's the only justification, then, you know, is that really meeting the objective of the organization? Can you make it simpler? Can you be more nimble? Can you be more costly? When it comes to all the things to spend your money on, are you willing to double the cost of sharing resources to preserve preferences? You know, we want to say, you know, there are some differences that need to be enabled in order to make sure material are always available to patrons. And those are the ones that might make a difference, but, you know, that's not the difference between 10 days and 14. Yes.
I completely agree with you in concept, but the reality is that libraries have, there are different funding sources.
That's right, different, you have
Yeah,
to
so-
convince the board.
Yeah.
And you can tell your board that, you know, is it worth it to us to pay 40% more to manage our collection in this way?
But I'm also saying that some libraries have more money than others, and so there, you know, that there are libraries that there are different kinds, of libraries within of these consortia, and they're just unwilling to give up local control because they spend more.
Yeah, but they also get more. The ones with the least money are the ones that get more back.
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm
So,
just
you
saying
know,
it's.
those are different arguments you have to make with these library
It's a
boards and so
political
forth.
reality.
But I understand the political difficulties, and it's real easy for me to spout off and say these things.
Right.
And, but, you know, I just hope it kind of prompts the thinking of
I
that.
agree with you.
But, you know, we just gotta kind of move out of the 70s and kind of face what people expect today.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
to make sure I understand? And you might need to go back to the previous slide. With the INSIP schematic that you had, you show a shared bibliographic database,
Yeah.
but there is no shared patron database. So that's basically what the INSIP is carrying,
Yeah.
all of that data.
Yeah, there can be a shared patron database, but I don't think that's the way they actually do it.
I'm just thinking about with the shared ILS, which normally has a shared patron database, then cards can be carried back and forth from one library to
Correct.
another and used. But with this model, it would be not possible, or
What do you mean? So-
where if I don't have a shared patron database, and I'm actually, I guess I may be extending it to reciprocal borrowing, not just ILL, but a patron that would walk in from A to E, their
Well-
card would not be recognized.
No, so they always authenticate against their own systems. And then once they authenticate with their own system, then the transactions push it over here, and they set up a temporary patron database here that's probably anonymous.
I see, right, okay, okay. That makes sense.
They all, yeah, local
This
authentication.
is an ILL model.
And ILL,
This is not a reciprocal model.
right, okay.
You know, if you look at, this is what Ohio Link would
Yeah.
use. So that's, I would call that reciprocal borrowing. It's, you're moving things one library to another, but it's not ILL in the sense of let's get it outside the system.
The consortium model that we outlined in the other, next slide takes care of it.
Okay, okay. I think I've
So,
got it.
to your point with this slide, and of course we talked about this scenario in a meeting yesterday at length. The point of this slide is that this is extremely difficult to maintain, fragile in its nature.
Well, you can tell by what it has to do that it's more complex, and that it's using systems in ways they weren't designed to use. You're forcing, you're inserting a circulation transaction into a circulation system that it wasn't designed to necessarily do that way. But it mostly works. I don't want to say that it doesn't mostly work. But, so the complexities are, one, you still end up buying an IOS for each of these systems. What's the aggregated cost? You have to set up all the INSIP profiles. You have to do all the work to do there. You have to maintain this system, how do you synchronize this database from all these other integrated library systems and have it reasonably up to date. You know, here if there's 6, if there's 60, you know, that becomes a pretty heavy problem. And then what happens when you change ILSs? You know, then you gotta redo all of that again. And then what if you're saying, well, you know, all of our systems are due to be replaced anyway. We just buy all different ones and preserve all of this, I don't want to say insanity, but complexity. You know, so when do you kind of bite the bullet and say that we can meet our business goals and consolidate systems? How many ILSs do you really need? Do you want one in every library, in every consortia, or broader? When you see countries moving to national infrastructure, when you see states and other countries moving to statewide infrastructure, you know that it's possible to do. It's just not what, you know, what's the right give and take when it comes to shared infrastructure versus local branding and values and policies. And I would suggest you can have both. And if you care so much about having your own local ILS and all of that, how are you going to kind of get to the next step with ebooks and all of the other kinds of things? This really only applies to the print model. So how do you, again, extract yourself from the 70s and 80s and put yourself with infrastructure that will be good for the next 10 years?
And just to reiterate what you were saying about the NSIP model varies between the different vendors as far as where they apply. So even though you've got 6 INSIP on here, you may have 6 different flavors.
Yeah, and that was kind of the demise of the fulfillment project, where all these different inset profiles that were very difficult to manage for that project.
And you don't even have to change systems, just a new version.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's gonna change the
Yeah.
whole INSIP thing, which has to be rewritten.
Yeah. So, people do this, people still do this. You look at the state, Mailcat has been around for a long time, it's built out of InReach. And it has different ILSs, and it's used pretty successfully, and Boston Library Consortium just did a deal to manage sheriff monographics on behalf of Massachusetts Virtual Catalog. So they kind of do that, but it's a separate system. It's not what any library uses for their own discovery environment. I was involved in a consulting project recently where there was a consortium that was multi-county, multi-type, and then a city system. They had separate systems. So the first idea was, let's just put a common discovery system on top of them so that we can share we can have kind of share identity, we can share our collections, all that better. And there really wasn't any vendor that was willing to do that. Take a single discovery system and make it talk to multiple back-end ILSs. Really, Commons kind of does that, but really in their own special kind of way. So now they're working for a shared ILS. So if you want resource sharing to be off on the side, this is the model. If you want it to be baked in, this is kind of another possibility. So give you some examples. So in Auckland in New Zealand, what this illustrates is that, so you take a municipal system and you have all these separate adjoining communities that were previously on separate systems. They amalgamated into one system so that they kind of doubled the size of the municipal system to bring in the outlying areas. How many city-county systems are in the U.S. that have different systems on principle? If you live on, are you served by the county or in the incorporated area? That determines what library system you get to use. So again, we make distinctions based on political reasons. This is a project going on in New York City where it's putting a common front end all from Biblio Commons in front of the 3 ILSs that are shared in the public library systems across the 5 boroughs, and then the school system so that the students in the system can request any book from any public library. So this kind of works, but it's also in the beginning implementation phase. So this is the innovative InReach model based on what we saw before, and this continues to be used there. I think they really wanted to replace InReach with something else, but haven't been successful in doing that. So in the shared infrastructure, all of the libraries in Iceland share the same system. Public, school, special, government. But there are only 400 something of them, so it makes it a little bit easier. But they have the concept of national shared infrastructure. In Australia, states have about the same weighting relative to the national government as they do here. So there are several states that are going to a one card, one LMS policy. We're going to, previously in South Australia, there were dozens, many dozens of independent automation systems in different communities. And so, to a data side, we're going to have one of these. And so they're still, I think they're about 2/3 of the way in implementing this model, but that provides egalitarian access to library resources to every citizen in the state. Okay. If they like that model, one library card, so this is a pretty extreme version. That wouldn't fly in a lot of states in the U.S. where independence is valued and all of that. So, just to show that kind of technically can be done, but to really host any system. Seriously dynamics now. So system scale. That's not the problem. In Chile, the national network, of all the public libraries, 500 and some odd, in a network called Biblioretis, has a single Aleph implementation, ViewFind as the discovery interface. And so this is Chile is I think even just considered part of the developed world now. But they've invested in this, and they use Viewfind as the interface, and they just will bring in ebooks through a company called Modelo to kind of make ebook lending an inherent part of the experience. So, really interesting, and we're all familiar with Georgia Pines, Evergreen implementation, very traditional iOS. This is book functionality. How do you share books? As far as I know, there's not any ebook functionality in Evergreen. They're serving 275 libraries across all these counties, this many books, single library card, but only 43% of the population. The real difference for a lot of US areas is that the rural areas have much different requirements than the municipal versus rural. So there are some systems that are good at supporting large consortia of small libraries. It's a whole different animal to say we're going to support urban municipal libraries. Just look at King County's implementation of Evergreen if you want to see some pain. 30-to-1 complaints from customers really want that new system. They've recently kind of given up on the front end and now they use the big ones.
Marshall, your opinion, please. Is an open source, like what this is built on, is that preferable to something like a Polaris or a III?
So I have no preference when it comes to open source or proprietary software, but which meets the business need. So I don't, whether it's open source or a proprietary license matters to me a lot less than it has the right features and scalability. The cost of ownership is roughly the same. You look at a lot of the kind of nascent statewide efforts into Evergreen and like North Carolina and some other places. There's been far more on that initial deployment of open source than they spent on the systems that get displaced. So it doesn't meet the business need. When you think that, you don't have individual libraries working with the source code, but does it meet your value of open by being open source? That's important. I think libraries value open source. All these systems are built out of open source components, but you get access to the business logic itself. How many of you have software engineers on staff that can work with J2EE, the Microsoft.NET stack, or something like that, that is a code base of millions of lines? And do you really have software engineers where that is an operational difference, or is it you embrace the value of it being open source and shared and not owned by a company? All of those are important factors. But you look at the resources behind the development of these systems, it can be pretty remarkable. Well, so all Northern Ireland, one system just moved from Axial's Open Galaxy to CC Dynex. You guys have heard of this one. Orbis Cascade, tell that story a bit. 37 independent academic libraries, not quite the size of Carly, but including the University of Washington down to colleges that have 200 students. They all had separate ILSs. Most of them were Millennium, so there was Orbis, consortia of Millennium Systems, Cascade, so they merged using a single inReach system. They kind of, this issue was innovating, so then they went to OCLC using Navigator and WorldCat resource sharing, and ultimately they decided the only way we can share resources efficiently is to share a system. So they went out to bid. Actually, the final two were Innovative and Ex Libris. Alma from Ex Libris was given the bid, the contract, and they're well into the implementation of this. I think the second or third cohort of the libraries is in production, going into production now. So just sharing the system. So that after several other efforts going from the NSIP-based one to the shared system, at least this group of folks decided that the shared system was the only way they could effectively share their collections. And initially they meant print, but they also want to do as much as they can with sharing electronic collections as well. So a lot of geography, Washington, Oregon, Idaho. We talked about Denmark already. This is an interesting one. So you have Columbia University and Cornell University, two major institutions that are sharply competitive with each other. They compete for grant dollars, they compete for faculty, they compete for students. You know, these are arch rivals from an institutional point of view. Yet, they said that the libraries can cooperate. So for a long time, they've had some Mellon grants to support common collection development in given areas of the collection. They've just gone to a shared technical services model so that